All right, okay. We're back here in the live stream. We were just chit-chatting about San Francisco, so we'll stop our chit-chat and transition over. But we're here with Paxton from Anthropic, and he's gone from doing a lot of interesting things, from surgical robotics to IVF, and now scaling Claude with partnerships. So maybe I'll start with you just to introduce yourself and what brought you to Anthropic and what's been your focus today there.
For sure. I had somewhat of a circuitous road to Anthropic. I started my career as a biomedical engineer, then worked, as you said, in the medical robotics space, building surgery systems for lung cancer detection. I'd lost several grandparents to the disease, and it was a very impactful mission for me. That company ended up getting acquired, and so I went back and used my winnings to pay for grad school, where I did a master's in data science. And then I started a company that did artificial intelligence for embryo selection. So in the IVF process, a big decision point is you've created these embryos with the parental genetic material. Mm-hmm. How do you know which one is the best one to transfer for likelihood of pregnancy? And so we built convolutional neural nets back when that was all the rage in Silicon Valley, and was the new AI to assist doctors in that clinical decision. And then after running that as CEO and founder for about 5 years, was incredibly excited around, obviously Anthropic's mission. It was pretty much the only place I actually applied. And there I get to work on kind of two things. One, outside of healthcare, all our relationships with the top venture firms in the country, and try to work with them to help support their portfolio of portcos and help them get the most out of Claude. And then the other side is I get to spend some time on our healthcare strategy, which has been a lot of fun.
I love that. Oh my God. Yeah, you throwing back CNNs into the mix. I feel like that was the thing to say, and now it's totally gone with Gen AI completely replacing.
I think they'll come back. I mean, you worked in self-driving cars for a while.
Yeah, I know. Being in
right?
self-driving, it was very much the foundational piece of the building block. And I do think that, I actually, speaking to that, I do think there's this big rush towards Gen AI, but how do we bring that and then connect that back to some of the foundational technologies is the next pivot that'll help make those mature products, I'd imagine.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing kind of all these discrete building blocks get created, and as we go up one more level, we're starting to see the orchestration or integration across these different things. So initially we just had one agent doing things, and now we have multiple agents all coordinating, and then we've got MCP servers, that create context protocols across all our workflows. And so I could totally see there being either like a side agent that is just CNNs running on images or whatever, the architecture demands. So I totally agree.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of see how the architecture shapes up around that. I have a question around that, but before we get into more serious topics, maybe start with some of the fun things you've been doing. I feel like Gen AI really unlocked what we're doing today, which is a build-a-thon that is really reshaping the traditional hackathon to be acknowledging it's so much easier to build. Instead of building one thing that hackathon really does, we're here where teams are building 10 things in one day. Yeah. So I'm curious, what has been for you fun personal projects you've been working through?
A bunch of different things. I mean, I can tell you the areas that I'm most interested in. I mean, one is how these are affecting kind of foundational science and research. There's a lot happening. Obviously, we've seen on the biology side, but there's some really cool work I've seen coming out of folks in kind of theoretical physics and using LLMs to predict particle locations and trajectories and compare that to more traditional heuristic or algorithmic-based solutions. That's one area. Obviously, coming from healthcare, I really love the applied side. Yeah. So spending a lot of time around mental health, behavioral health, psychiatry, psychology. Actually, this morning I was sitting over there. I created an MCP server to catalog DSM-5, which is the psychiatry handbook with all the diagnoses.
Yes.
I was, just wanted to build an MCP server, so I did that this morning, and it worked out great. Claude crashed when I tried to load the whole thing in there, and it was able to answer all my questions. And what I've been using it for is interpolating and extrapolating between different diagnoses and kind of trying to expand it for categories or the ambiguous areas of mental health. And then in terms of just my side projects, it's a lot of random apps that I'm building like everybody else, trying to build an AI therapist and or companion or chatbot I think the thing that's really shocked me the most about Claude, and especially Claude Code, is how much it's helped in my non-technical work.
Yeah.
So, my current role kind of spans a lot of different things within the company, but, specifically, we do a lot of market analysis. We're constantly integrating, different SQL databases and looking for, how different spending patterns or market numbers are looking. And I've found so much, new kind of capability within my own role to do these types of things that previously would have taken me hours to kind of figure out and debug these various databases and pulling it all together, creating dashboards and stuff. So it really is cool to see the applicability, not just within inside like the developer community, but also across all the other different functions within a large company, finance, marketing, whatever else.
I know. I will say the question was fun, and your answer was particle theoretical physics and DSM-5, which I'm very familiar with. My wife's a psychologist, and there's the DSM-5 is like a big, on the mantle.
Yes, all volumes of it. It's like 900 pages of PDFs.
I know. But that's amazing. And I guess as a power user, do you think that there's some like fun tidbits you could share with folks that really unlocked for you in your personal workflows and such?
Yeah, I shared a little bit about this earlier on, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but I have found that there are these like really funny niche phrases that if you just put at the end of your question, it does make a big difference. Don't break anything else has really gotten me a lot.
Honestly, I'm going to start using that one.
It really does a good job. I would say that's one. I think getting really thoughtful around the steps of development. So what I mean by that is not just jumping in and saying, build me Tetris, but really forcing the model and Claude to think through its implementation, its planning, do a lot more upfront work. And what's interesting is we've been having this debate, I think, as a community around, okay, now that we have these models that are so good at coding and getting better every day, does that mean that software engineering is going away? Like, do we not need software engineers anymore? I think the more that I go deep with the coding capabilities or these other agentic, functions, the more I realize how valuable, kind of core basic architecture, development is when you're structuring these things. And so, I still think there's going to be a place for technically minded folks in the future. And I think those that have that kind of foundational knowledge of basic traditional CS are going to be able to use these much more effectively than others.
I have been thinking a lot about that too. And one thing what you said reminded me is, well, one, there's this concept of how do you translate what's in your mind to the model itself, and that is a skill on its own. And I feel like there's this question of how much is that on the model to just interpret and understand versus what are UI components we should build to support that, right? For example, Claude Code is, I would argue, keeps it very open where you are still text-based, but what role do you imagine UI playing in providing that structure so that in some ways you can have that alignment with what you're trying to get across? Do you imagine that UI will come in and say, you should really provide who your audience is and what you're trying to build, or keep that still abstracted away? What's your take?
I think you're calling out a great opportunity and a deficiency today. The irony here is, what you're talking about it's a lot less to do with the Claude side of the interaction and a lot more to do with the human side of the interaction.
For sure.
And how to coach them to get where they need to go. And I find myself, I'm guilty of it too. Like, I'll type in something that is, very vague, or I'm requiring it to really read between the lines to understand what I'm asking at. And obviously the more prescriptive you can be, the better. I think the more, as you work with the tools, you start getting better at using, creating your own spec.txt, spec, architecture documents, things like that, saving stuff into memory. I think the really funny thing is that I often find myself asking Claude to do that work for me again. So it's just kind of this like recursive, okay, I figure out what I need to do, but I'm too lazy to do it. I'm just going to have Claude give me an architecture doc.
And that's
it
the
does
challenge.
a great job.
That's the challenge, because I feel like this is going against the fundamental nature that if humans want to avoid that work if we can, but in some ways you have to do some degree of work to be able to communicate what you want. So I do really go back to, at least my mental framework is, if we were to do this iteration recursion to its extreme, what we really need to get to is how do you, as accurately as possible, articulate the pain point or the use case you're trying to solve towards, right? As opposed to giving it engineering spec or anything. Right. Like, how do you communicate that? That's the question.
Yeah, I think we're all learning to speak Claude a little bit better over time.
Yeah, that's the new language.
And you know, it is a little bit of a language, but you know, the thing that keeps coming up for me is, what is the differentiation for a software business now, right? As this gets better and better, internal large enterprise teams that you used to be selling our dashboard into or whatever it might be, they're able to just build these things on their own. And even non-technical people, high up managers are saying, hey, I want to be able to see this revenue forecast, or I want to see what our breakdown of work is this quarter. You know, they're able to build that now by themselves, as opposed to historically paying a subscription to a third company to have that dashboard be there. Yeah. And so I think the differentiation in business model for the next wave, like the bar has just gotten higher and higher of how do you show ROI, and that make versus build decision is getting easier and easier to say, well, let me just make it, you know. How
you may not be able to answer, but how do you think about the strategic direction for Anthropic? Obviously the core is the foundation models. Yeah. Which areas do you think Anthropic needs to still operate in to continue to build that versus focus on just then models?
You know, I think one of the things I think Anthropic's done really well is, you know, one, we're hyper focused. You know, we're trying to build, you know, safe, compliant artificial intelligence, really for the enterprise, you know, customer. And I think that has been a very smart strategy to differentiate. Yeah. We've been very friendly in the market. We don't, you know, we aren't out there trying to build every application that all of our customers are building. We are letting third parties do what they're going to do best, and kind of arm them with that underlying, you know, capability and functionality that they need to build on top of. Over time, I'm sure Anthropic will slide into different territories. We're seeing some of it in the PubSec area, which I know we may talk about. Obviously, finance. We just did a big launch. We're doing more in healthcare, hopefully eventually, and so, you know, there are going to be kind of industry verticals, but I think in general I like the strategy of kind of arming everyone with picks and shovels, and not you know, outwardly competing with them directly.
Yeah, go with the picks and shovels. Yeah, speaking of that, I know that was a big news release around giving access to Claude for the government use. I was kind of curious, how do you imagine that playing out? What would you like to see that improve with that access?
You know, there's good parts and bad parts to this. I mean, obviously it's no secret that our legislation and the opus or corpus of you know, laws and is astronomical and is continuing to expand. And so allowing our government to have tools to summarize those things and be able to, you know, do their work with these types of adjunctive, you know, capabilities that Claude can deliver and process huge, vast amounts of information, I think is going to be awesome. The worry I have is that eventually, so much of our laws are going to be written just like everything else with the help of AI, that no one will have actually read what's in the laws. And I kept having this funny situation happen back when I was, you know, running my company, where I would have an idea, and then I would feel like I need to put together a memo or a deck to summarize that idea and share it with my board. And so I would have Claude write this entire memo out, and then I would share that memo with my board, and I realized my board was just taking that memo, putting it into Claude, and summarizing it. I was like, we're just burning tokens for no reason here. So I worry a little bit of that with our federal government uses. But obviously, you know, it's incredibly important for the strategic viability of the United States, and for us to be on the forefront of cybersecurity and all these different areas that obviously AI touches. So in that regard, I'm very excited.
Yeah, I also think it'd be exciting. And one of the things I also noted is with the 1 million context window, there's a lot more you can do. So I'd imagine that's going to be a big unlock, especially with all that corpus. I'm curious, you know, again, as the expert, what have you seen as that really unlocking for folks and customers? What's been new, if you can speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, the 1 million context window has been something I've been excited for a while now. Okay. You know, one, just the ability to process an entire code base to you can feed, I don't know if you've tried Claude projects before, but you can feed just immense amount of information into it at a large scale, and that's critical for lots of enterprise use cases. I think, I've seen some really funny things happen with it where I've seen some folks like just give a designated Mac computer physically to Claude and just let it build whatever it wants for days and days and days on end. And so, the complexity of what it can do with that new scale, is just kind of pushing forward kind of the capabilities and the variety of projects that Claude can handle. But we'll see. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some really cool things.
What was the outcome? Do you remember?
It built all these random apps and things. Like, it was deciding what to build also. So it started building its own scheduler. It started building, its own like little game sequence. It started building like all this just random stuff. And some of it worked, some of it didn't work. But, that idea of like what happens when you put an LLM, an agent, just in its own VM and just let it run, let it be completely self-directed. I think that's the craziest part is like when you truly don't give it any context or any recommendation and you just see what it wants to do, it starts getting fuzzy with free will in there. And I think that's going to be an interesting research area.
I would love to, veer off on that, but we should keep on track.
We should keep it together.
But I do love that it went off and made a game for itself.
It did, it made it like this little asteroid game or something for itself to play. I was like, all right, there we go.
Yeah, here's Flappy Bird for Claude to just, I need a break from my scheduled tasks.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, kind of speaking to how, Claude is being used at enterprises, I know that a lot of enterprises, there's this shift balance of some are adopting it quickly, some are not. I'm curious how it's being used in Anthropic in more unique ways and what that could inform some of the enterprises that are slow to that adoption, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I said this earlier, and at Anthropic, everybody is really encouraged to try to automate their own job away, which is really fun. There's the old adage, right? If you do it once, do it bespoke. Once you do it 3 times, you should probably automate it.
Right.
And so we have that kind of mantra internally. I think, as I said before, I've been really surprised at how useful it is for non-coding tasks. So just like across the organization, our sales leaders are using Claude Code. Our sales reps are using Claude Code. Our marketing team should be using Claude Code more. Everybody is leveraging this in their day-to-day to interact with our data sources, draft emails, do outbound, analyze our conversations internally and externally. We have some very cool internal tools where Claude has access to a lot of our different types of internal programs and applications, and you can kind of query it across the entire organization and things like that. We actually have this thing called Ask Claude, and it just rapidly accelerates onboarding for everybody. You show up, and instead of me having to ask my seatmate, hey, where's the copier, you just ask Claude and it tells you everything you need to know. So that stuff's been cool. I think the things that I get really excited about when I hear is talking to some of our core research staff, and as I mentioned, like they will say, I haven't written a line of code in a year. Like Claude's just doing stuff, and it's wild to see people that are at that frontier on our reinforcement learning or alignment teams or whatever it might be, just totally relying on Claude. We talk a lot about closing the loop, so leveraging Claude to improve Claude. And I think it's kind of an exponential, right? As Claude gets better, it's getting better at helping us make Claude better. And so you get this kind of recursive improvement trajectory that it's just going to be wild to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I definitely am very excited about seeing how that plays out. And also, I'm curious, how do you, or I know this is a big question, but I'm just curious, how do we navigate as it gets into its own improvements, that visibility and interpretability? What are some of your takeaways on how that's being done successfully and us maintaining that alignment and understanding of how it's changing and improving? Are there best practices you've seen to be able to continue to have that human in the loop and be successful?
I think it's a really hard problem, and I think it's kind of the problem of the day, right?
Exactly, that's why
Anthropic's approach, and I do think that we are kind of at the forefront of this, is around our constitutional AI, which is really meant to be, a set of values that Claude has to follow. And I think it does a pretty good job of that. And then we do a ton of red teaming, making sure it can't build nuclear weapons or chemical weapons. That's obviously a really important, critical safety measure. but we're all trying to figure out where the lines are. We certainly see this where we may have very strict parameters for what general consumption can look like around safety, and then we'll bump into a premier biology lab, and they need it to do some of these things that we've said we don't want the general public to have access to.
Right.
Or when we give it to a 3-letter named agency in the government, they obviously need a less safeguarded version.
Right.
So I think there's the safety and compliance thing is a big piece of it, and then around when you start just letting Claude go and fixing Claude, there's a lot of supervision that happens there, and I think that it's hard to do that in a very thoughtful way, but I think it's where you're going to see some of the most important breakthroughs in the field come from.
Yeah, that and I've been just really thinking about that interaction between the human and the agent as such a big field that's going to continue to blossom, so to speak, as different people focus on different niches of that. So we talked about earlier on the UX side, but even on coding side and understanding what it's building, just that interaction. And when is the right time to do the check-in with the human? What is the context to share or not share?
For sure.
I think will be fascinating.
Well, one of the pointers I've been trying to give folks here is using Claude to generate is great, but then you have this black box code base that you have no idea how it works. And so I spend a lot of time in VS Code or whatever IDE you're using, or cursor. On the side, I've got the cursor agent in ask mode, and I ask a million questions about what's going on in my code base. Why did we design it this way? How does this feature work? Blah, blah, blah. And then I have Claude actually building, implementing, planning, architecting the code base. And so I kind of use it as like a question and answer situation between the two. And I've found for myself, we've talked a little about how do people get better at these things. Claude teaches you how to use Claude. It's like a crazy phenomenon.
Yeah.
It'll teach you how to code. It'll teach you how to use Claude. Teach you how to build MCP servers. Teach you how to multi-agent work. Like, it's so amazing because it has all these capabilities of web search and doc search and everything else. So it's really an instructional tool as well as a development tool. That's
so true. I mean, I was just thinking about just the method of learning, right? This concept of hands-on learning is so crucial. And I feel like when you're operating in natural language with the tool you're using to create things, you unlock that ability to have feedback from what you're building and the users. Then the second level is you get feedback from actually building the thing, so the app that's created, you're getting that feedback. But to your point, the third level is just the fact that you can get feedback from the tool itself, like what am I doing and how I should do it. So they're just like layers of input and interaction 100%. That are kind of unlocked, more so than just the typical as you build, you get input. So I really appreciate that multi-layered feedback system.
I mean, I remember when I was doing my master's, this was pre-Claude back in 2019, I used to have to ask like classmates all the time, like, what is going on in my code? How do I fix this bug? Like, what does this mean? And now Claude is that person for me, and I don't have to bug anybody on my team. It's amazing. So, I think we've always said, I think once the internet came out and YouTube came out, you could teach yourself to code. That is just on a completely different stratosphere now. Anybody can figure this out just by asking questions.
Well, I know we're getting at time, so is there anything else that I feel like, you feel like I haven't covered that you want folks to know about Claude, Anthropic, or what we've discussed?
We should definitely use Claude Code. I think that's
Remember
number
that.
one. No, I mean, I think, one, I'm super grateful to be here. Thank you to the AI Fund for inviting us to be a sponsor. I'm super excited to see what everybody comes up with here and builds. I think as the AI community continues to grow and just the population of folks that are technically literate thanks to these technologies, the sky's the limit of what humanity can create here. So thrilled to be here, and thanks for hosting.
No, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining. And we're going to be walking around and talking to some of the teams next. So stay on in 5 minutes. You'll get to see what the teams have come together with. So thanks everyone.